It's white to play in this position. While I set the context, please try to find the best move for white. Today, I'm showing you beautiful ways to dominate an enemy knight. I will show you a beautiful tool that you can apply to different positions to shut down the enemy knight. I will show you what knights hate in chess, the worst enemy of the knight. They get humiliated and buried and entombed when they see that enemy. Let's start from this position, folks. Knight on g7. Terrible piece, right? Look at that piece. If we can make one move with white in this position, we can totally shut down that piece. And the move is g4. The art of burying pieces. This is the worst enemy of the knight. A single pawn like that can humiliate an enemy knight in chess. This is called the Karpov distance, by the way. When there are only 3 squares between the knight and the pawn, the knight can be dominated like this. Look at this. That's why we say fianchetto knights are terrible usually in chess. They are limited already because they are close to the corner of the board. Here, the knight's already restrained by its own pawn on e6, and it cannot go forward to f5 or h5 just because of the pawn on g4. Literally, white is playing with an extra piece in this position. As Tartakower says, one bad piece makes the whole position bad, and I will show you how this actual game went. This is one of the most beautiful games, to my mind, played by Yefim Geller. Black goes h5. Do you take the pawn? Do you do something else? Or do you play h3? Of course, once we know our goal, we keep the pawn on g4, guys. h3 is the best move, and that single pawn, despite the fact that there's an isolated pawn on g4, is burying that knight. Please observe this pattern, because if you internalize this pattern, folks, you can apply the same concept to different positions. Today, I will show you how the same pattern applies to different openings, from King's Indian, Ruy Lopez, even Caro-Kann. I'll just show you how the actual game went because there's a clear connection. Black cannot make a single move, the bishop cannot move because of rook f7 ideas, right? Well, knight e4 is coming on the next turn, black is busted. They tried b5, takes, not a pawn, but he goes to knight e4, guys. He wants to go to f6 on the next turn. Knight f6 check, fork. You must take that knight after takes. Can you see? That buried knight is now becoming a trap piece. This is a beautiful game, guys. A fianchetto knight is simply trapped because it's just hit by the pawn. This is what I want to teach you today. A single pawn on a Karpov distance can be a real hindrance for enemy knight in chess. Now, I will show you how the same pattern applies to diverse openings. Let's start from Ruy Lopez. Geller versus Mecking. Geller with the white pieces again in this position, okay? He wrote a book. In his book, he calls these burial patterns as giving him more excitement than the most dashing attacks in chess. Really, dominating knights and winning games like this gives us great joy. That's why I created an entire course about this, the art of burying pieces. In this case, it's about Spanish opening, guys. c3. We are keeping our good Spanish bishop, of course. If knight f5, we want to preserve it, bishop c2. That will be the game continuation. Knight f5, black wants to play c5, and Geller preserves the beautiful Spanish bishop. And already here, please look at the knight on a5. That's our game plan. White's entire strategy in this game revolves around burying that piece. And I'll show you how the same exact pattern applies to this position. Knight c6, black is putting maximum pressure on the pawn on d4. Thus, Geller goes d5. And now already here, there's a big dilemma for black. If they go to d8, can you see the Karpov distance? The knight is a buried piece on d8. This pawn is the worst enemy of that knight, and there is not easy way at all for black to solve their knight problem in this position. That's what the space advantage is about. White has more space. Why? Because this extra space is limiting black's minor pieces. That's how you understand the space advantage in chess. And of course, the knight is suffering the most from a space advantage. What do we learn from this example? Second big learning from this. Not all close positions favor the knights, right? Think about that. Many people think, hey, knights thrive in close positions. Well, that's a close position, but the knight is dead. It's suffering on d8. So please break those misconceptions. Knights can easily be buried in compact pawn chains like this. Knights are very specific pieces. It depends on which exact square the knight is placed into. In this particular square on d8, the knight has zero life whatsoever in this position. In the actual game after d5, they go to a5, but already here, guys, please look at this. It's a Karpov distance again, this time in a horizontal setting. The knight is still suffering on a5. The knight on the rim is dim in this position as well. Again, white's entire game plan revolves around shutting off that piece. One bad piece makes the whole position bad. Please observe next phase of this game only looking at this knight on a5. This is great learning. Real gem is taking place here, guys. Please observe how the knight is suffering. For example, just to be able to stop knight c4, Geller plays the move. You guessed it right. He goes b3. The art of burying pieces continues. He says, your knight is completely shut down from the game and there is no easy way out for you. Please watch, guys. This is a beautiful strategic victory. He makes all the typical Spanish moves, of course. Knight is just favoring favor of the bishop. White has more space. Here, knight b7 again. Black wants to maybe improve the knight, but it's not easy at all. If it goes to d8, it's still restrained by the pawn on d5. The knight has no future on d8. So there's only one idea left for black to improve the knight. That's why they go c4. Please stop the video, guys, and tell me how white should react in this position. The art of burying pieces. There is only one good move here for white, and you're a great player if you found the move b4. The mirror image of the first position I showed you. Remember, g4 pawn was killing the knight on g7. Here the same. Fianchetto knight on b7 is buried by the pawn on b4. Beautiful positional pattern. The knight is dead. There is no way out for the knight. Please look at this, guys. Please observe how terrible that piece is feeling on b7. This is the entire strategy for white in this d4, d5 Spanish openings. Space, again, we are seeing clearly why space advantage is a huge advantage for white. That's also why, by the way, he goes b3 here. He anticipates the entire idea of c4 and he gets ready for the move b4 at that moment, right? Multifunctional move b3. Totally about restriction of that enemy knight. Once again, they go c4, b4. Geller gets big positional advantage because of the knight problem. Here, he improves his pieces. Yeah, once there's an enemy knight that is dead, then you can play all the natural moves. You can focus on your ideas on the king side because black must solve the knight problem. They go a5. Geller doesn't even react because this pawn is supporting the pawn on b4. So there is not even a need to respond to this move. That's why he goes rook e3 in this position, guys. He's highlighting those ideas simply. After takes, he takes back again. Just like in the first game, the b4 pawn is killing that knight. Karpov distance, the worst enemy of a knight in chess. They are humiliated, right? A single pawn is killing a knight. It's incredibly humiliating experience for knights. Knights hate this, guys. Please don't ever play with such knights in your games. Try to avoid those scenarios, please. Takes. Geller focuses on his plan on the king side. The knight is still dead. As long as the knight is dead, this game is highly in white's favor. Geller goes ahead and exchanges off every other piece, but keeps the knight on b7. That's also a great strategy, by the way. When the enemy has a buried piece, please exchange off every other piece, but leave them with that buried piece. That's exactly what he's doing as well. Rook e4 is also a very classy move. He's stopping queen c4 ideas as well. He's stopping black from playing e4 and so on and so on. Maybe rook g4 and so on and so on. It's a beautiful restriction move as well. The knight. Never forget about the knight, guys. Black's biggest problem is the knight. Has no future whatsoever. Has no future whatsoever. And again, he just takes his time. He goes knight d8. Still, look at the pawn on d5. The knight hasn't improved a bit in this position. These two pawns are completely killing the knight in this pawn formation. He takes his time. He's not in a hurry. The knight is dead, right? He has all the time in the world to organize his position. Rook b3 improves further, keeps an eye on the pawn on c3. He doesn't hurry to take that pawn as well, right? He just takes his time because black has no moves whatsoever in this position, guys. f6, rook e3, we are coming there, guys. We are coming there. Rook c3, the knight is still dead, by the way. Even if you go to h6, there is still no life for you on that square. Finally, white gains a pawn. White blockades the pawn because otherwise black might even play e4 and knight e5. Look at this. He's even restraining that. He's even stopping black's intentions of sacrificing a pawn to awaken that bad knight. Bishop e4, like deep blue move against Garry Kasparov, guys. A very human move. Bishop e4. Again, the knight is the main problem. Plus, white is the extra pawn in this position. He tries some moves. nothing will work. Again, the art of exchanging pieces. When the enemy has a terrible piece, exchange of everything else, but keep them with the bad piece. G5 also kills that knight even further. And also, if the position opens up, those bishops will be showing their teeth. F6 is coming now. Two connected pass pawns here. That pawn is totally restrained. And now Queen H5. Final action is going on the king side. This game is over, guys. Bishop E3. How he will resign after the move F6. Black resigned because there are so many ideas like Queen G6. Not to mention these ideas. If you take my pawn, then comes Queen G6 check. And the queen waits. And this game is totally finished. Bishop F5 to E6. This is just purely game over. Spanish players, never forget this pattern. Your game plan revolves around this piece on A5. And if a bad piece remains on the board, then your position will always be favorable in those positions. And look, Karpov distance this time in a horizontal setting. Karpov distance on a vertical setting is coming now, right? Same exact pattern. That's a function of knowing your positional patterns, because then you can apply it in diverse pawn structures. I will show you other openings now, including a king's Indian position as well. Guys, this is such a beautiful positional pattern that it applies to different openings, including a king's Indian defense. White to play in this position. This game was featured beautifully in a beautiful book called Under the Surface by Jan Marcos. He was humble enough to show one of his losses. He was playing with the black pieces here. His opponent played a beautiful chess here. There's some pressure on the pawn on E4, guys. And here, white plays the move. You guessed it right. What's the way? What is the right way for us to dominate that knight on E7? That knight on E7 is now suffering because of the pawn on E4, right? Also, the entire pawn chain is limiting that knight clearly. So he goes F3 to blunt the knight, to shut down the knight completely. As I said, knights don't always thrive in close positions. That's a close position, but the knight is suffering. Let me tell you a surprise. For the rest of the game, the knight couldn't manage to make a single move. Unbelievable, right? Please watch the game by always looking at this knight on E7. White even sacrifices a pawn in the process. That's what makes this game beautiful. Because white says, this knight is so terrible that I'm even giving up a pawn on C5 as a result. Of course, I will recapture with the pawn in this position to blunt your knight, to shut down your knight, right? No knight takes E4, no knight takes E4, but F takes E4 is the best. Yes, you can win a pawn on C5. Still, my game plan is totally around that knight on E7. That's a beautiful positional game, guys. Please watch. Knight C4 attacks the pawn on E5. Knight G4. Well, black wants to create some counterplay. He plays bishop takes G4. The point is, if you take the bishop, then you lose because of rook F1 mate, right? But of course, queen D3 guards the rook on F1. White's game plan is to isolate the knight on E7. Never forget this. That's our game plan. That piece is bad, has no function whatsoever, has no future whatsoever, and want to keep it as such. Bishop E3 again, we are exchanging off black's only active pieces, but leave them with a terrible piece on E7. The entire game becomes so much more easier to understand once you see the knight on E7 and see how bad it's placed. Queen C4, eyeing some ideas like this. Queen D6, the queen is tied down in guarding those pawns. Queens hate defending in chess. One more pawn is gobbled in his position. White already is winning completely, by the way, guys. White's a completely winning advantage here. But I will show you until the very end of the game to highlight my point. The knight could never make a single move on E7, guys. It's incredible. It's incredible. Rook takes E7. One more pawn is gobbled, attacking the bishop. Black tried to attack the knight, but because the bishop is also hanging, black has no time to win a piece in this position. Takes, right? If the queen takes on D7, the rook is lost. So white is completely crashing through. Comes a check, queen F1, highlighting those ideas. We are coming in for an attack against black king. After G4, they resigned because they are getting mated soon. If this queen H6 just checkmate, otherwise this hangs with a check on E7. That poor knight could never manage to make a single move. Now it will be dropping with a check on the next turn. So what's the bigger lesson? Look at the big picture. King's Indian defense. It happens all the time, and usually it's good to replace the pawn on E4 with a pawn for white. Why? Because you want to kill the knight on E7. Because many people are confused here. Hey, should I take back with a piece? That's an outpost. Or should I take back with a pawn in those positions? Well, speak to the pieces. If the enemy has a terrible knight, if both knights are on the board, if you can see that your extra space can kill that knight completely, then you almost always want to replace the pawn with a pawn in the king's Indian position. Because look at the big picture. Your advantage lies in space for white. So you want to keep as many minor pieces on the board as possible and to limit as many pieces as possible using your pawns. What makes this game beautiful are two things. White was sacrificing a pawn to kill that knight. Long-term positional pawn sacrifice. And the knight on e7 could never manage to make a single move for the entire game. And we are talking about grandmaster games, guys. Now you have basic intuition about these concepts. Please tell me whether black should play the move c5 or knight c6 in this position. Okay? Please stop the video and choose between these two options. Knight c6 dominates beginner games, guys. If you look at beginner games, they keep making moves like this. It seems like a developing move. It looks like they're helping their knight. In fact, they don't help their knight at all. The knight is killed on c6. It's crying on this square. The knight is dominated by the pawn on c3, right? Karpov distance between the pawn and the knight. It happens all the time because beginners, post-beginners, lower intermediate players don't have this positional pattern yet in their long-term memories. So they are clueless of even to understand whether a piece is good or bad on that particular square. This is changing today. That's the function of this training, guys. If you really internalize this, this is definitely going to help your game in total. You have basic intuition about piece placements and see when a piece is happy or sad. But if you go c5, of course, you prefer this formation. Then you can play knight c6 on the next turn because at least there is more pressure in the center. And this knight will even be supporting further ideas like e5 to completely destroy the pawn chain, in fact, that is killing that knight on c6 position in the Caro-Kann defense that many beginners, post-beginners, even intermediate players go wrong terribly, okay? That's a very popular line in the Caro-Kann. Takes, knight f6. Many players with black plays like this. They accept double pawns because their king will be safer in the middle game, right? And here comes my question. Do you go knight f3 or let's say, should you go bishop c4 and knight e2 in those positions? If I give you two different setups for white, would you rather play the bishop out and knight e2 in those positions, or would you rather go and play knight f3 directly in this position? Many beginners, guys, and post-beginners, intermediate players, play knight f3 without thinking. But to my mind, that's a dubious move, clearly a dubious move. You play it because it looks like, hey, I don't want to kill my bishop, I want to get my knight out, I want to castle. But look, now you know more patterns in chess. See how that single pawn on f6 is killing your knight completely. Your knight is a bad piece on f3. The knight has no potential whatsoever. The knight doesn't even support any other ideas, like for example, knight e2 to g3, maybe knight e2 to bishop f4 to exchange off their bishop, and so on and so on. The main line is bishop c4, guys. If you look at the, let's say, main line moves, it goes like this. At least the knight is a better piece on e2. It has more potential, as I said. It supports bishop f4 ideas. You have a better pawn formation. You're welcoming minor piece exchanges because pawn endgame is winning for you. Also, the knight can also jump to g3 to f5, g3 to e4, right? We see potential for the knight in this position because the knight is not killed by a pawn on e5 in this case. But if you play knight 3 voluntarily, then you're shutting down your piece yourself. I've seen many games in those positions. Black gets a very comfy position because of the knight on f3. The knight is badly placed, misplaced. You must fix this knight at some point for white. This will cost you time and miscoordination and so on and so on. Hopefully, after today's lesson, your intuition has grown and you're looking at the pawn chains, you're looking at the opponent's pawns, and you don't want to generally, voluntarily go for those structures that the enemy pawn on a Karpov distance can kill your knight. That's the worst enemy of that knight in such positions. I will leave you guys with this homework position. B takes c4 was black's last move. Do you take back with the pawn or with the bishop? That's a great consolidation exercise that will really consolidate this knowledge. Also, that's a trade-off between two different chess concepts. And you will learn how to prioritize between different concepts. It's always give and take in chess. There's no perfect life. That's a perfect example. Both moves seem to have certain drawbacks. You need to see this first. Then you need to decide which one we should go for and why. Okay? I also want you to write down the why information to me here by leaving a comment on YouTube. This position is so rewarding and beautiful that I will put this in my upcoming course on the workbook for the Art of series. I created 4 courses on strategy, the art of exchanging pieces, awakening pieces, multi-purpose moves and burying pieces. The art of burying pieces was shown today in those examples. In this workbook, I'm giving you mixed puzzles. So you don't know the theme up front. You need to see, you need to understand which theme applies in any given position, just like an actual game. So I'm giving you a chance to apply the knowledge that you gathered in all these 4 courses. I made a video about taming the knight in chess that involved much more tactical scenarios, that you're avoiding knight forks, especially. You know how to very quickly check whether a knight can fork your pieces. In this case, we are learning positionally how to kill enemy knight in chess. Positional tools to quickly judge whether knight is placed well or badly on a particular square, and how you can play with your pawns to bury and kill enemy knights. And I hope by the end of this video, you no longer think that all close positions favor the knight. That was also one of the bigger lessons from this video. Knights can easily get buried in compact pawn chains. You also have better intuition about what space advantage looks like in chess. These were my overarching goals with this important video as well, folks. If you summarize your points yourself, that's even better for long-term retention. Hope you loved it. If you loved it, please give me a like and subscribe, and share this video with a friend who you think would benefit from its content. Check out my courses on chess strategy to consolidate this knowledge. You need testing. You need much more focused testing to fully automatize this process, and my courses are designed for such positional skill building. See you soon.